Child of Bones, I'm assuming that you believe in ancestral curses. Can I ask you, what's your strategy for dealing with ancestral curses?
Okay, so I think like any curse or hex or negative resonance within a life experience, you have to take each individual case and give it the uniqueness of a prescription, if you like, of magic or a way of addressing it. So I wouldn't say there's one cure-all at all for an ancestral curse, but there's different types, and I think there's different cultural frameworks that we work within because our DNA, our ancestors, the tribe that we grew up in, our sense of interconnectedness with tribes, our culture, the country we're born, the one that we reside in. There's loads of different things to take into consideration, and that doesn't mean that in the modern world we can't effect a cure for an ancestral curse. I just like to be effective. My thing is about actually if people have got the right energetic configuration right, they'll get the result. So I believe in strongly not just using one incantation or one god necessarily that and then kind of handing it over. I think you need to sit down, work through what it is, you know, bring in the family tree or the history, or consider the culture or the framework of understanding within the person, and then going, oh okay, well what would probably fit with that is, you know, Mako woman. What would fit with that would be feeding the ancestors over time. You know, maybe there's an embodiment the person could do, and I don't mean possession, that would help heal in 3D reality through time. There's loads of different little variations you can do. So that's probably not really answering your question.
You're certainly on the way. I mean, you seem to be indicating that it's important to be culturally specific. Could you expand on that at all? Perhaps you could give me a recent example of something to try and illustrate this.
Okay. Right, well, rather than talk about clients I have and their own, I don't really want to give specifics away because I think it's sensitive to people, and people don't come to me so I could make a YouTube clip about them and leave their family stuff out there in the world. And I haven't really prepared to think about how I could sort of protect their privacy. So I think I'll stick with my own family because I'm comfortable about talking about stuff that I've done rather than other people's families. So one thing that my ancestors told me in shamanic journeying, and I certainly saw it when I ingested the great master plant ayahuasca, several times I was drawn back to the ancestral graves of my family, and that there was a hiccup, I think, for want of a better word, rather than perhaps I would say a direct curse, but it was something that had been shown to me repeatedly about it jumping down the generations, and so it needed healing and it wanted attention. And what the ancestors kept saying to me, either on ayahuasca journeys or in my dream state or in meditation over a series of years, it wasn't just one thing and then I acted on it. If only I had the pay of a nurse to go and fly around the world every time a spirit told me something. So I didn't. So it was a well thought out planned trip back to Polynesia where I executed what they wanted. And so over years I was told the same thing over and over again, that they wanted the embodiment of their ancestors, which was me, that I was the chosen one out of the family that could hear the messages, that I was to go back to the place of power on the land where my ancestors are buried, because they said that that was a good portal for my ancestral lineage, not because necessarily there was a earth chakra there or anything like that. It was because that was the link that I had psychologically and metaphysically to in 3D reality to my ancestral heritage, and I was to feed it some of my blood. Now I know that certainly I spoke to a friend of mine that's a reputable shaman in the UK, and he said to me it was that he would never feed his ancestors blood, and said that, you know, be careful and he gave me sound advice, you know, really sound advice, and I really took on board what he said. Be careful about feeding any spirits in graveyards, be careful about feeding with blood, certainly living blood, your own blood, because that has other connotations in, say, the voodoo tradition, which I'm not privy to because I'm not from there and I don't practice voodoo. So my style of witchcraft is very, you know, eclectic for me. So I went with how I felt. It was my ancestral lineage. I'm not from the voodoo. I'm not a voodoo priest or priestess. And the ancestors kept calling and saying that that's what they wanted. And so I did it. I went back to Polynesia as part of a trip going home to see my family. And I was on my way to the graveyard to give them the offering. It wasn't that I was literally feeding the bones of my ancestors. I wasn't trying to raise the dead. It wasn't Hollywood. This is no dark fairy tale. I was going to the place that would actually take an offering. Now this is different from necessarily saying that you're using the power of a tribal god such as the shark goddess Mako woman to cleanse and shred and tear with the totem of shark through bonds of negativity in your ancestral tree. And that is what I've worked with clients of Shoulder Bones, is use that format. It works very effectively. What I was doing was slightly different. In order to smooth over a hiccup that had been passed down generations in my family, I, as a child of this branch or bridge of ancestral requirement for healing, I was offering the blood, the fertile blood of my womb to my family to offer and appease. It's slightly different, but it was still yet again another take of having the same result, which was to heal something in the ancestral line. So I sought counsel in passing with a shaman that I knew that was very respected. He said, perhaps don't try that. I don't think it's a great idea to feed them something else, like white foods, for example. And for me it was like, no, I'm okay with it. When I got to the cemetery, on the way to the cemetery, my father got out of a truck and we bumped into each other, and he was just coming home because he'd just been at the medical centre, and what had happened is he'd had an accident at work. He's scrub cuts with knives, machetes and stuff, land, and has tractors that cut grass, and some blade had cut him, and he literally had been covered in blood from his neck down to his torso because the blood had splattered. He wasn't actually severely injured, but he looked like he'd just walked out of a horror film. He was absolutely covered in blood, and the asexual voice, the ancestral power, on my way to, you know, to the cemetery to feed them the blood in my womb, I saw my dad covered in blood, and they said the blood has started to shed. So they already were seeing that part of it. And it was bizarrely, it was my dad's line I was going to feed. It was my father's line that had the hiccup that needed it. And it's always really been my father's line, in a way where I hear the strongest. Not to say that I don't hear my mother's, but it's often my father's that seems to, for whatever reason, have spoken to me the most. But so I saw my dad covered in blood. The voice said, you know, the blood has started to shed, and I thought, today's the day. I'm definitely on target. I got up to the cemetery. I did what was required. I sat down, I watched the birds, I listened to the wind. I saw huge spirits I've never seen before, not even as a child growing up in New Zealand. Once I spilt the blood on the ground and said, you know, that I was there to appease the power of my ancestors, I was there to call, I saw huge, tremendous spirits, which if I didn't have such a strong sense of protection with my ancestors and the power of the Morrigan, I would have been terrified. The spirits took the shape of the trees, and they used the leaves of the wind to form shapes around me in these gigantic ancient trees at the cemetery. And they were howling. And, you know, my God, if anyone was witnessing what I was doing that day, it was the power of the ancestors. And they were gigantic spirits, guardian spirits. And I don't believe they were in any way, I'm not, you know, don't believe I'm the centre of the universe. I don't believe that the guardians necessarily were there for me. I don't think they were there to say, oh look, Shoulder Bones is doing something. I'm not that self-centered. I believe they saw that on their land someone was doing something, and that they were showing themselves. And because I was in an altered state of consciousness, because I was connecting with my ancestors on a very powerful, specific working, again with blood. I mean, is anything more magical than blood? to me as a witch, possibly not. Blood in my womb, my dad's covered in blood. You know, I'm there on this land where my ancestors are cradled in the belly of the earth, and the guardian spirits ran up the tree because they needed form to show themselves to me. And they were like, who are you? What are you doing here? It was more that energy. So I knew something really powerful was happening. And I did it, and, you know, God, it's probably not even interesting to listen to this story, but I did it, and it was my act of, you know, my act of giving something back to the ancestors, try and appease whatever had happened, which I won't go into. They had, you know, in a lot of ways nothing to do with me, but I was still, you know, part of the family. I was carrying some of the can, like the others were in the family, and you know, and I just wanted some relief for everyone really, and for the future generations, my niece and my nephew. And so when I went home, I left that day and I thought, well, you know, I've done my thing, and I saw some really strong, massively strong energy come up out of the earth to witness that, whether they just wanted to know what the hell I was doing on their turf, or whether they were witnessing it and adding power. I don't know. I think, you know, that it was probably just they just wondered what I was up to. And then I went home, and yeah, I don't think that we're, you know, this isn't a Disney movie. I mean, magic's not a Disney movie. We do things to affect change in the community and for ourselves, and we try and bring alignment, we try and anchor peace and love and empowerment. And so for me, I went back and, you know, everything wasn't skipping in roses. It wasn't like, you know, the sun came out and the birds started singing. It was a nice day, don't get me wrong. But what happened to me personally after the offering was that I felt good, but I started crying uncontrollably, and I cried to embarrassing levels in front of my family. It was really difficult because it was a family reunion and everyone was wondering what the hell was wrong with me. I made up a story and said I'd broken up with someone I was seeing in England, which was bollocks, because I didn't know what to say, because I didn't want everyone to worry about me. And I couldn't say, I've just fed menstrual blood at a cemetery, because I believe something's wrong with our, you know, I just went with it. The thing is with my family is that if I said that, they would have actually gone, oh, did you? Okay. But it's not like I couldn't say it, but I didn't want anyone to be responsible either, or feel like, what are you doing? You know, I just didn't want the headache. So, or trying to explain it. So I made up a story because I couldn't stop crying. It was hard, and what it showed me really was actually also, I don't know whose tears I was crying, and I had no rational reason of why I was crying. I just couldn't stop crying. The next day I was fine, don't get me wrong, but it also shows, I think, how much chi and focus is expended when you're in the presence of great power. And I think that, you know, when people aren't actively living modern witchcraft, they can think it's a, you know, Buffy the Vampire Slayer or whatever the program is, or they can think it's, you know, like a chapter out of some mystical book that, you know, you're down on your luck, you find power, and then everything's great. I think it's a work in progress. You know, we do stuff, we expend energy, we carry on, everyone feels better for it, fantastic, game on.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, what you seem to be saying is that you are at least given information regarding certain positions in space and time that you feel you should be in order to do particular things that might affect change. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yeah, but not often. I'm not often one of those people. I mean, I have friends that are, you know, practitioners of shamanism, and they will specifically go to points and plant crystals, or specifically go to places of sacred acknowledgement and honour on certain days. I actually don't do that. I believe very strongly that wherever I am, whatever I'm doing what I need to be doing. I'm not actually one of those people that goes on a pilgrimage, for example. I know people that do, and I see the benefits, but it's not actually been a direct calling. That specific thing was.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, in the Celtic tradition, the spilling of blood at sacred sites, especially at certain times of the year. I mean, for example, March can be a very powerful thing, but the output isn't necessarily obvious and immediately dynamic. It can be powerful but very subtle.
Right.
I was just moving on to just ask you whether in your dreams, in your dream state, you have any experience of connection with ancestors that leads you to certain feelings or actions when you're awake?
Well, actually, that's a really good question. Yes, I often, all my life, have dreamt of sharks. And the sharks are the power of my ancestors manifested in like a sort of totem form, if you like, for want of a better word. And I'm not sure I should use the word totem because I know there's different interpretations and I'm not even clear on it. But basically, when I dream of sharks, it's the ancestors showing me something very vividly. And I have, for example, I need to pay attention. And you know, one dream not that long ago, probably about 6 months ago, was that I was in the ocean, half in the ocean and half not. So I had one foot on the ocean and one in whatever it was, and like the temperance card or whatever. But and what happened was I was bleeding. I think I'd cut my foot or something, and all the sharks in the entire ocean clocked me, and I stood there like a sitting duck. And it was like the absolute, my dreams with shark are always such high alert, and they're always showing me that I've got to pay attention. Something is occurring, I've got to pay attention. And it's not always, you know, dangerous. It can also be that I'm missing something. And so yes, they do. They come to me in voice, they come to me and show me visuals, and they also sometimes just come to me in the form of a shark and make me pay attention. Because your primal interaction with sharks, whether we like it or not, is like spiders and snakes. Our primal thing is we're incredibly crystal clear and alert to time, place and person. And the power of the ancestors do that for me.
That's interesting. So you seem to be saying that in your dream state you get some kind of almost a signifier that would ask you to be mindful for some unknown but specific event during your waking hours.
Yes, and it's always a really close proximity to the event. So if I have that dream, it's usually that day that something's going on. It's not some kind of like meditative rolling hill thing that's going to happen in a few months. It's right there, right now.
I think it would be useful, without asking you to betray any confidentialities, whether you could give some kind of just working illustration of anything you might do in terms of ancestral curses with clients that you have, without actually betraying any confidences, but something that relates to people living in 21st century London.
Okay, well maybe in the next video, I'll think about the privacy, and maybe in the next video.